All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be taking a look at a really interesting book called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L.
Yeah.
Collins. And we're going to be specifically looking at an interview that he did,
Oh. Okay.
which is really interesting, I think, because we've talked about this book a little bit in the past.
Right.
But I think it's really interesting to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Um, so, yeah, I'm really excited to dig in this one. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think so too.
And so, yeah, I guess the core idea here is really this idea of financial freedom,
Yeah.
and how to achieve it.
Mm.
And Collins really kind of boiled it down to this idea of simplicity,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So much of the advice that's out
It's
there
just so complicated.
is so complicated and it's so overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
And he's really saying like, hey, there's a simple path to wealth.
Mm.
So I'm excited to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think he does a really good job of cutting through the noise and like getting to the heart of what actually works,
Yeah.
and tackling the feeling of being lost in this sea of complex financial jargon and offering this like refreshingly clear path.
Right. And it is refreshing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I was really struck by when I was reading this was his just this core message,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is so deceptively simple.
It is.
He basically says like, look, if you want to build wealth,
Mm-hmm.
you need to spend less than you earn, you need to invest the surplus,
Yeah.
and you need to avoid debt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
You would think it'd be easy, but
Right.
not really.
But how many of us actually do that?
Yeah. How many of us actually manage to do all three of those things consistently?
Right.
It's tough,
And so I think that's like one of the things that he really hits on is that like it's not so much about the knowledge.
Yeah.
It's about the behavior.
Totally. It's about that mindset shift.
Yeah.
And he spends a lot of time talking about the importance of conscious spending,
Yeah.
right? Like really focusing on the things that bring you joy and cutting back on the things that don't.
Yeah.
Think about how often we spend mindlessly,
Oh, totally.
just out of habit.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I've really been trying to focus on lately is just being more mindful
Yeah.
of my spending and really thinking about like, okay, is this something that's actually going to bring me joy?
Yeah.
Or is this just something that I'm buying because I'm bored or because I'm,
Or because it's on sale.
yeah, exactly. Or because it's on sale.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's a really important point. And then, of course, he talks about investing.
Yeah.
And he is a huge advocate for VTSAX,
Yeah.
the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's interesting because, we've talked about index funds on the show before.
Sure.
But he's really like, this is the one.
This is the one.
This is the one to go with.
He almost sings its praises.
He does. He really does. And so I'm curious, for those of us who maybe are familiar with index funds, like what is it about VTSAX that makes it so special in his eyes?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is its broad diversification across the entire U.S. stock market,
Yeah.
right? You're basically owning a tiny piece of every publicly traded company in America,
Right.
which is kind of cool when you think about it.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so is that kind of the main reason why he's such a fan of it?
I think so. I mean, it's a really solid foundation.
Yeah.
But, some people argue that it's a little too US centric.
Right.
And that, diversifying globally could be a good strategy as well.
Right. Yeah. And we've talked about that a little bit on the show before too.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a good point is that,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And there are other options out there.
Right.
But I think that, for someone who's just getting started,
Mm-hmm.
and is looking for a simple way to invest,
Yeah.
VTSAX is definitely a really good option.
It's a good starting point.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I think, one of the things that people often ask about investing is the risk,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We hear about market crashes all the time.
All the time.
And so how does Collins address that fear?
Well, he acknowledges the risks,
Mm-hmm.
but he really emphasizes the importance of long-term thinking.
Okay.
The market will fluctuate.
Yeah.
It always has and it always will.
Right.
But historically, it has always trended upwards over time,
Yeah.
right?
Huh.
And so VTSAX is allowing you to ride that wave,
Yeah.
It's like a roller coaster, you know?
I like that analogy. It's going to have its ups and downs, but if you stay on the rise long enough,
Yeah,
you're going to end up higher than you started.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to think about it because I think a lot of people get so caught up in the short-term fluctuations,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that they lose sight of the long-term trend.
Right.
And so I think that's a really important point. And
Yeah.
then one of the things that Collins talks about in his book that I thought was really interesting was this idea of FU money.
Yeah. I think
Um,
a good one.
and and I have to admit, when I first heard that phrase, I was like,
What is that?
"What is that?
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean?"
Yeah.
But I think it's actually a really powerful concept.
It is.
And so I'm curious to kind of get your take on it. Like, what does FU money actually mean?
Well, it's not necessarily about being rude to anybody,
Right?
you know?
Yeah.
It's really about having the freedom
Okay.
to make choices in your life without being tied to a paycheck.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like imagine having the flexibility to change careers, to start your own business,
Yeah.
to travel the world,
Right.
to pursue a passion project
Yeah.
without having to worry about immediate
How
income.
am I going to pay my bills next month?
Exactly,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So it's really about that freedom and that flexibility to live life on your own terms.
Right. And I think that that's so powerful because so many of us are trapped in jobs that we don't like
Oh, yeah.
or in situations that we don't like.
Mhm.
And we feel like we can't leave
Right.
because we need the paycheck.
Yeah.
And so I think that this idea of FU money is really about having that financial security
Mhm.
to be able to say, like,
You know what? I don't need this anymore.
I don't need this. I'm out of here.
I'm going to go do my own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a really powerful concept, and I think it's something that a lot of people strive for.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I guess, kind of the key takeaway from Collins
Yeah.
is really this idea of starting early
Yeah.
and being consistent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about leveraging that compound interest. You
Yeah,
know, even
okay.
small amounts invested consistently over time
Yeah.
can grow exponentially.
Yeah.
And the earlier you start, the more time your money has to work its magic.
Right.
You know?
And so it's not about, trying to get rich quick
No,
or trying to time the market.
no.
It's about making those consistent choices over time.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And letting that compound interest do its thing.
Yep.
So I think that that's a really powerful message, and I think it's something that we can all take to heart.
Yeah, for sure.
And so yeah, I guess that's kind of the main takeaways from the Simple Path to Wealth.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really valuable book. And I think it's something that everyone should read.
I agree.
And so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive.
I hope so too.
And I hope you learned something from it.
Yeah, and I hope our listener walks away feeling empowered.
Yeah.
You know, like it's really about taking action.
Yeah.
Even if it's a small step.
Right.
You know, starting today, even with a small amount, is a victory.
Yeah. It's all about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's a really great message to end on.
Yeah.
And so yeah, thanks for joining us,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.
See ya.